They handed me a name tag. Not mother of the groom, not even Helen Worthing. Just one word. Afterthought. All caps, centered, a sticker. No gold trim like the others. I stood there in my blue lace gown, holding it between two fingers like it might burn me. Behind me, someone popped a champagne cork. Laughter burst like fireworks. They were already posing for group photos. Emily's side, all white teeth and blush chiffon. Nobody noticed me. I am Vesper Helen Worthing, 65, widowed, a mother. And yesterday, I was an afterthought at my only son's wedding. Today, I own the penthouse he thought was his future. 36 missed calls, still blinking on my phone screen. I haven't returned a single one. Before I take you with me through everything that happened, do one thing for me. If this story finds a corner of your heart, click the like button, subscribe, and tap the bell. Because you and I, we're not afterthoughts, not anymore. The venue was lavish, the kind where chandeliers drip crystal like rain and centerpieces have their own floral designer. I arrived 10 minutes early, not fashionably late, never been my style. But as I stepped into that marble lobby and saw the seating chart, I already knew. No Helen Worthing listed among the reserved family rows, just this sticker. Peeled off a sheet, slapped into my hand. Afterthought. That was all they'd printed. No table number. The young girl at the check-in didn't even meet my eyes when she gave it to me. She just smiled and said, "Enjoy the evening," like I was a donor, not the mother of the groom. I tucked the sticker into my clutch. I would not be wearing that. No one greeted me. Not Emily, my new daughter-in-law. Not her mother. Certainly not my son, Christopher. He was across the ballroom, laughing, pouring drinks, adjusting a boutonniere that I didn't pin. There was a gift table, stacked like a pyramid. Gold-ribboned boxes, envelopes with checks fat enough to make the legs wobble. I walked over and placed my gift down gently. A white box. Inside, a silver ribbon, and beneath it, the deed to a $25 million penthouse overlooking the city skyline. He never knew it was mine to give. Christopher once called it the next chapter. Said he and Emily were ready to build their legacy. He didn't know I already held the pen. I looked at the placards near the dining hall. Emily's grandparents, reserved. The Freeman family attorney, reserved. Florist, photographer, makeup artist, all listed. My name wasn't among them. I stood still for a moment, watching the waiter pour rosé into crystal glasses. One woman walked past me and said, "Excuse me, are you with catering?" I didn't correct her. A man nearby, maybe Emily's uncle, laughed and pointed toward the gift table. Saw the tag on one of the boxes. Some joker put Afterthought as their name. Can you imagine? His wife giggled. That's cold. I left before the first toast. Didn't wait for cake. Didn't smile for the family portrait. My feet carried me out the side entrance, past a waiter holding a tray of mini crab cakes. Outside, the night air felt honest. The irony? He'd thanked me a week ago for staying out of the way. Said it would mean a lot to Emily's parents if I kept things drama-free. Drama-free. They printed Afterthought on my name tag. They smiled. I just left quietly. I looked down at my phone again. 36 missed calls. From Christopher, from Emily, from numbers I didn't recognize. But I wasn't going to answer. Not yet. Because sometimes silence is the only voice they hear. And sometimes the only seat you need at the table is the one you build for yourself. The first time I met Emily, she looked around my living room like it smelled of mothballs and forgotten dreams. She didn't say anything outright. She didn't have to. Her eyes did all the speaking. She took in the floral print sofa that Harold and I bought the year Christopher was born. The same sofa where he took his first steps. The worn armrest where I used to balance a bottle while holding him with one hand and folding laundry with the other. Emily's eyes landed on the crocheted coasters, the ones I made during chemo. I offered her tea. She smiled tightly and said, "Oh, I'm more of a latte girl." I told her I didn't have a machine for that. She said, "No worries. It's kind of charming in here." Charming, like a thrift store with sentiment. Christopher cleared his throat. "Emily's just used to more modern interiors," he said, as if translating. I nodded. She didn't sit down until he did. That day was the first time I realized I was being gently erased. Not violently, not rudely, just sanded down. A few weeks later, they invited me to dinner at her parents' place. I brought my lemon bundt cake, the one Christopher used to beg for on his birthdays. It sat untouched beside the tiramisu from the caterer. Her mother offered me mineral water with lemon, then told me all about their planned renovations for the starter penthouse. Starter. As if a 2,700 square foot condo on 44th Street was an appetizer. They talked about open shelving, quartz countertops, and gutting the built-ins. The built-ins that Harold designed himself. My fingers curled into my napkin. Emily leaned in at one point, smiling at me with all teeth and no warmth. "I'm sure you understand, Helen. It's just, we want to make it feel like us, you know?" U.S. Christopher never once looked up from his phone. He didn't even glance at me when I said, "Of course. It's just a space A lie. But I've learned to survive on lies you tell with grace." I think the moment it all crystallized was one Sunday morning, when I brought over a box of old photographs. I thought they might want to include some in the wedding. Maybe a display, a photo of baby Christopher in the bathtub, him in Harold's arms at the beach, one of the three of us in matching Christmas pajamas. Emily flipped through them, humming. Then she paused, held one up, and said, "This isn't the aesthetic we're going for, but maybe a few for the memory table at the back? The back, where people might stop while getting coffee. Or not at all." She handed the box back to me and said, "We're trying to keep the vibe light." I said nothing. I packed the photos back into their sleeves. Christopher stood beside her, arms crossed, unreadable. I waited for him to say something. Instead, he walked me to the elevator and said quietly, "Mom, can you just try to be pleasant?" Pleasant. As if I'd made a scene. As if being invisible wasn't already the most pleasant thing I could be. Back home, I sat on my front porch with the photos spread across my lap. I looked down at one, me, young, sunburned, smiling, holding Christopher at the lake. No makeup, no filters, just joy. I whispered to the wind, "I am trying." 2 days before the rehearsal dinner, Christopher called. "I need to ask you something," he said. My heart lifted. Maybe an apology. Maybe he noticed. "Can you not bring up Dad during the speeches?" Silence. He filled it. "It's just, Emily never met him. And her parents are kind of sensitive about that stuff. We just want to keep things focused on us." The future. My throat tightened. I managed, "So, no mention of the man who raised you? Who saved every cent to buy that penthouse you're moving into?" A pause. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I hung up the phone without another word, walked to the kitchen, pulled out the recipe card for lemon bundt cake. I didn't bake it. I just stood there, staring at Harold's handwriting on the back. "Add extra zest if she's had a bad week. Love H. I folded the card back into the drawer, and that night, I opened the safe behind the linen closet. Inside, the original deed, the transfer forms, the amendment Harold signed 2 months before he passed, giving me full control. He'd said, "In case they forget, Vess, I know you won't, I hadn't." So when Christopher told me, "Mom, don't stir things up," I smiled, because I knew what he didn't. The waters had already been stirred. All I had to do was let the tide roll in. They didn't invite me to the cake tasting. I found out when I bumped into Lydia, an old friend from church. She asked how the red velvet turned out, said she never imagined Emily would pick something so bold. I smiled and nodded as if I'd been there. I hadn't even known they'd scheduled one. Later that week, I scrolled through photos on Emily's Instagram. There she was, seated beside her mother and 2 bridesmaids, laughing behind white fondant samples shaped like peonies. Christopher stood in the background, distracted, holding a tasting spoon. I noticed something else. 3 champagne glasses on the table. 1 for Emily, 1 for her mom, 1 for her sister, none for me. The florist meeting? Same story. I'd always imagined picking flowers with my future daughter-in-law, showing her the pressed lilacs from my wedding album, telling her how Harold had written a note under each bloom in the bouquet, like a secret scavenger hunt. But I never got the chance. When I asked Christopher if he needed help choosing arrangements, he paused and said, "Emily's aunt is sort of taking the reins on that." I said, "Of course." I understand another lie wrapped in politeness. Still, I tried to stay present in small ways. Supportive, quiet, hopeful. A week before the engagement party, I mailed them a gift, a delicate silver frame, hand-engraved with their initials and the wedding date. Inside it, I placed a black and white photo of Harold holding baby Christopher, both of them wrapped in a towel on the front porch. The caption beneath it read, "Love that lasts chooses quietly every day." It came back 2 days later, the box unopened. Taped to the lid was a Post-it note, neat, precise handwriting. "Emily's. We already have enough frames, but thank you for the thought." No salutation, no signature. Just that. I sat on my bed holding the note. My hands didn't shake. They didn't need to. Some pain comes not like a storm, but like cold settling in your bones. Familiar. Expected. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the hallway closet, opened the small wooden box where I kept our wedding album, and slid the yellow Post-it inside. Right between page 16 and 17, where my own mother had written me a letter before she passed. That note joined the archive of silences I've endured. They never asked about the gift again. Christopher didn't call, but that night, as I poured myself a cup of tea, I let my eyes rest on the manila folder tucked into the bottom drawer of my desk. I hadn't touched it in months, not since the transfer had been finalized. Most people don't know this, but back when Harold was still healthy, we bought shares in a high-rise project downtown. A quiet investment in what used to be an abandoned printing press. He'd said, "Vess, in 10 years, this will be the future skyline." He was right. What no one knew, not even Christopher, was that when Harold died, he'd left me full decision-making rights on our portion of the development. And when the last penthouse was released, Unit 4403, 3,200 square feet of glass, marble, and sky, I'd claimed it under our investment trust. It wasn't under my name. It was under the trust's, which I controlled entirely. Emily and Christopher thought they were moving in as new owners. They weren't. They were tenants. and they didn't even know it. I never mentioned it, never threw it in their faces. I wanted them to be happy, to build something of their own. But each time I was left out, each time I was erased a little more, I found myself imagining the sound of the front door to that penthouse clicking shut behind me. Alone, quiet, mine. There was one more moment, small, forgettable to anyone else, but it stayed with me. It was the night of the rehearsal dinner. They didn't ask me to speak, didn't ask me to light a candle, didn't even assign me a seat at the head table. Instead, I was placed near the back, between Emily's college roommate and a second cousin who couldn't remember my name. When I excused myself early, no one noticed. I stood outside the venue under the string lights, holding my purse, watching couples laugh and clink glasses through the window. I pressed the car key in my coat pocket. My hand brushed against something. The Post-it. Still in there. I unfolded it. Read it again. We already have enough, but thank you. I smiled, because that night, for the first time, I believed it. They did have enough of noise, of flash, of appearances, but what they didn't have was foresight or gratitude, or the deed to Unit 4403. The ballroom shimmered. Crystal chandeliers hummed above us, reflecting off walls lined in ivory and gold. Each table sparkled under tall centerpieces of orchids, roses, and what must have been $800 worth of eucalyptus. Waiters floated like ghosts, silent, white-gloved, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres that sounded more like French poems than food. Everything was perfect. Everything except me. I had no place card. I wandered for a few minutes, feigning distraction, pretending to check my phone, smile politely at strangers. Finally, I asked one of the ushers, a young man barely old enough to rent a car, where I was seated. He checked the list, double-checked, then whispered something to a woman in a headset. She smiled too tightly. "Oh yes, table 19, she said. Just there, near the restroom entrance." She pointed. "Far corner, near the swinging doors, next to the coat check." I sat in silence. My seat wobbled slightly, one leg uneven on the marble. I folded my hands in my lap and watched. From a distance, Christopher looked happy, radiant even. Emily held his arm like a trophy. Her dress sparkled with hand-stitched beads, her smile wider than I'd ever seen. They stood under the arch of peonies, receiving congratulations from Emily's aunts, her father's colleagues, her Pilates instructor. No one came to my table. No waiter offered me a refill. No photographer pointed a lens in my direction. Not even a nod from Christopher. At one point, Emily's grandmother glanced my way. She squinted, turned to the woman beside her, and asked, loudly, "Who is that?" I held the corner of my napkin between my fingers, folded it once, then again, tiny, neat squares, like folding away my pride. The music shifted, the first dance. The lights dimmed, and all eyes turned to the couple as they stepped onto the floor. I stood up slightly, just enough to see past the orchid arrangements that towered over my table. Christopher held Emily close, whispering something that made her throw her head back and laugh. And in that moment, with the music swelling, the crowd swaying, and joy blooming like confetti, he never once looked for me. A young server passed by with a tray of crystal flutes. He hesitated at my table, then leaned in. "Ma'am?" he asked gently. "Are you carrying a tray?" I think someone said this seat was for staff. I blinked, then looked down, and saw it, that name tag, still clipped to the program booklet in my lap. The one Emily's cousin had handed me at check-in without making eye contact. I hadn't read it before. I had assumed it said, Mother of the groom. Or maybe just my name. But it didn't. Printed in small serif font, bold, unmistakable, was the word, afterthought. I didn't cry. Not then, not even later. I reached for it slowly, 2 fingers, as if lifting something delicate, sacred. I turned it over in my palm, felt the weight of that word, a pause, not in the room, but inside me. That kind of silence where your breath catches in your throat before your mind catches up. No fireworks, no screaming, no dramatic gasp. Just stillness, and then movement. Mine. I unclipped the tag, slipped it into my clutch, and stood. No coat, no goodbye, no scene. Only one sentence in my head, spoken not out loud, but inward, like prayer. I don't need a toast. I just need the right name. I walked toward the exit, past mirrored pillars, past tables blooming with laughter. No one noticed. No one stopped me. Until one voice, a child's, familiar, soft, Grandma? Lily, my granddaughter. 7, wearing a dress with little sunflowers, her curls bouncing as she ran to catch up. Are you leaving? She asked. I knelt to meet her eyes. I'll see you soon, my darling, I whispered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. And then, because I wanted her to remember, I placed a kiss on her forehead and said, always know where your seat is. And if they don't offer you one, make your own table. Outside, I called Ava. No need for pleasantries. She answered on the second ring. It's time, I said. She didn't ask why. She already knew. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the bank notification had arrived. I turned off my phone, slipped it into my clutch beside the afterthought tag. Then I walked, one heel after the other, into the night. Not alone, but with dignity trailing behind me like a veil. I didn't take the main exit. Instead, I slipped quietly into the hallway near the kitchen, then past the service doors, until I found the back stairs that led to the wine cellar. The staff at the Langston estate had always been discreet. They nodded at me, like I still belonged there, because technically, I did. The air grew cooler as I descended. Marble gave way to limestone, and by the time I reached the cellar, my hands had stopped shaking. I pulled out my phone. 1 missed call. 36 texts unread. None of them from Christopher. I scrolled to Ava Whitmore. Tapped. She picked up before the second ring. Mrs. Worthing. I took a breath. Ava, I said. It's time. She didn't ask why, just silence on her end, and then the sound of keys clicking. Professional. Precise. That's what I paid her for. Full execution? She asked. Yes, I said without hesitation. Pull the trigger. Now let me explain. The penthouse was never truly theirs. It was a promise made by Emily's family, one of many flashy gestures during their engagement. We're gifting them the top floor at the Langston, her father had said to me once at a dinner I hadn't wanted to attend. View of the whole skyline. Our wedding gift, as if they owned it. What he didn't know, or perhaps forgot, was that I held majority shares in the Langston Development Group. The entire tower bore the Langston name. Yes, but it was my late husband's land, my strategic investments, and my quiet decisions that allowed it to rise. When Richard died, the board assumed I'd step down. I didn't. Instead, I bought out 2 minor partners. Not loudly, not quickly, just persistently. By the end of that fiscal year, I controlled 62% of Langston's residential assets, including Unit 4403. The penthouse, the one with 3 terraces, Italian marble, and Emily's Pinterest mood boards all over the design plans. They never asked me, not for approval, not for insight, not even for access. They simply assumed I'd fade, Assumed I'd sign. Assumed, like so many others, that silence meant absence. It didn't. It meant I was watching, documenting, waiting. I could hear the faint thump of bass from the wedding floor above me. Laughter. A toast, maybe. Ava returned to the line. All authorization docs confirmed. Would you like to electronically sign or? I already did, I said. Tuesday, remember? A pause. Of course, she said. I just pressed send. The transfer will reflect within the hour. Send a copy to the escrow officer. And blind copy their wedding planner. Yes, ma'am. I sat down on the edge of a wooden crate labeled Petrus, 1982. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was just done. Done trying to win smiles that never came. Done offering explanations that fell on curated ears. Done playing the quiet ghost in their perfect little tableau. I reached into my clutch, pulled out the name tag, read it again. Afterthought. Not mother of the groom, not Vesper Helen Worthing, not even Helen, just an insult hidden in calligraphy. I held the tag in one hand, my phone in the other. Then I whispered, more to myself than to Ava, if you label me incorrectly, I'll just fix the paperwork. And I meant it. They could pretend I wasn't at the tasting, at the venue walkthrough, at the flower trials, but they couldn't pretend I didn't exist on the deed. Because now, I was the deed. As I stood to leave the cellar, I took one last look around. Richard had proposed to me just upstairs in that same wine room, 40 years ago, after a winter gala. He hadn't had a ring yet, just a folded napkin with our initials scribbled in red lipstick. Promise me, he'd said, you'll always know your worth, even when others don't. I nodded to the memory, to him, to the version of me he believed in, even when I didn't. Back upstairs, no one noticed me slip through the lobby. The valet barely looked up, but when I gave him my claim ticket, he smiled. Leaving so soon, ma'am? I just smiled back and said, better to leave as myself than stay as someone else's mistake. I woke up to the soft morning light pouring in through the bay window. For a moment, everything was quiet. No clinking champagne glasses, no whispered judgments behind manicured smiles. Just birdsong and the blinking red light on my phone. I didn't rush to check it. I walked to the kitchen first, boiled water, and steeped a single bag of Earl Grey in my favorite chipped porcelain mug, the one with the tiny crack shaped like a crescent moon. Only after I took my first sip did I pick up the phone. 36 missed calls. 5 from Christopher. 4 from a number I didn't recognize, probably Emily's mother. The rest were scattered. The wedding planner, the family liaison, even one from someone saved in my contacts as do not answer. No voicemails, no texts explaining, just ringing into silence. I took another sip of tea, then placed the phone face down. It wasn't the calls that stirred me. It was what Ava had said just minutes before. Congratulations, she said calmly on the phone. It's official. You're now the sole registered owner of Unit 4403, Langston Tower. The deed is updated and filed. She paused. You also asked me to blind copy the wedding planner? I did, I said, and the bride's family attorney. I could hear the faint click of her keyboard. Both copies delivered. Time-stamped. No one can claim they didn't know thank you. Then she said something I didn't expect. Do you want silence or do you want closure? I didn't answer right away. She wasn't talking about paperwork. She was asking about the thing that lives under everything, the ache. But I'd learned something in the last 24 hours. Closure is overrated when you have peace. And silence. Well, sometimes silence is the closure. There was an envelope waiting on my hallway console, hand-delivered. Inside, one single brass key, the kind that unlocks a private elevator, the kind that isn't given lightly, and a note printed on Langston letterhead. For your records, Mrs. Worthing, the penthouse belongs solely to you. All prior decorating appointments have been canceled at your request. Kindly let us know when you'd like the space prepared. I held the key between my fingers, feeling its weight. It was warm, not because of the metal, but because I remembered how they used to hand me the spare key. Just in case, they'd say. Not the main one. Not the one they gave to the decorator or the concierge, just the extra. The afterthought. Now I had the only copy. I set it down on the dining table, next to a linen napkin embroidered with my initials. No post-its this time, no calligraphy lies, no polite erasures of who I was. Just my name, on my deed, next to my key. My phone buzzed again. Call number 37. Emily. I let it ring, then ring again, and die. There's something I wish people understood. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. Silence is strength dressed in satin. I could have screamed at them in the cellar. I could have slapped someone at the reception. I could have sent angry texts in all caps and broken a champagne glass on the dance floor. But I didn't, because they wrote afterthought on my name tag, and I wrote my name on the penthouse deed. People will tell you family is everything, but what they often mean is, tolerate everything, or else you're the problem. I used to believe them, not anymore. I walked out to the small balcony attached to my garden apartment. The morning air was crisp. The city was beginning to hum. In the distance, I could see Langston Tower, a glimmering spire of glass and stone. They were probably still in bed, maybe hungover, maybe arguing, maybe pretending nothing had happened. That's their choice. Mine? I was sipping tea in peace, holding a key that used to be theirs. My phone buzzed one last time, a text, from Christopher. Can we talk? Please, just that. No mom, no apology, just panic dressed up as civility. I didn't respond. Instead, I whispered to the sky, they'll call. Because they labeled me as last. I'm just reminding them. I've always been ahead, and with that, I pocketed the key, finished my tea, and began packing. I wasn't planning on returning to the venue, not after what happened, not after the thud of silence that followed me out of the ballroom like a closing door. But I'd forgotten my wrap, a silk one, ivory-colored, with hand-stitched vines. My late husband had given it to me the year Christopher graduated high school. So I went back. Quietly. Mid-morning, while the staff was still packing up floral arches and folding chairs, like they'd never witnessed any cruelty. The lobby smelled like roses and spilled champagne. That's when I saw her, Carol. I hadn't seen her in years. We were friends once, back when our sons played baseball together and we used to bake scones for PTA meetings. Time had been generous to her spirit, if not her hair. It was fully gray now, pulled into a tight bun. She stood behind the reception desk in a charcoal blazer, scrolling through a clipboard. She looked up and froze. Helen? I smiled. Carol. She came around the desk and wrapped me in a hug before I could prepare for it. You haven't changed a bit, she whispered. I laughed lightly. Then I must have aged early. We sat on a bench near the coat check. She didn't ask why I left early. She didn't mention the placement card or the table by the bathroom. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in a cocktail napkin. I wasn't sure if I should keep this, she said. But when I saw it in the trash bin, she handed it to me. It was an envelope, cream cardstock, embossed in gold, and slashed across the front, in blue ballpoint ink, was my name, Mrs. Helen Worthing. But it had been crossed out. Twice. The ink dug deep into the paper, like someone wanted to erase me with force, like I'd been invited, then uninvited with intention. Carol looked away. They told the printers they only needed 48 invitations, she said gently, but I remembered this one. I wrote your address on it myself. It had already been sorted for delivery. I stared at it. Something hot and bitter twisted in my throat, but I didn't cry. Instead, I folded it, pressed the creases softly, and said, "Thank you for returning it to me." We sat in silence. Carol pulled out her thermos and poured 2 small cups of chamomile tea, like she used to on the baseball sidelines. The scent made me nostalgic for years when Christopher still looked for me in the bleachers. "I wasn't supposed to be working that night," she said after a while, "but someone called out sick. I almost didn't take the shift." "You're still working events?" I asked. She nodded. 3 nights a week. Keeps me moving, and to be honest, I like watching people forget they're being watched. That made me smile. Carol always had a quiet kind of wisdom, the kind you don't notice until you need it. "I once got cut out of a wedding, too," she said suddenly. "Not mine, my niece's. I raised her for 5 years after her mom passed. I turned to her, surprised. 'She removed you from the guest list?'" Carol shrugged. Her fiancé said I was too old school. I guess that meant I didn't have Instagram. She took a slow sip. They printed digital invites and sent them out through an app. Didn't think I'd notice I clenched the napkin tighter around the envelope. "What did you do?" Carol smiled. I waited. For what? For the day they lost power and couldn't log into anything. She called crying because she didn't remember anyone's number, except mine. We both laughed, not loudly, just the kind that comes from something tender and earned. I stared at the crossed-out invitation in my hands again. "You're going to keep it?" she asked. "I am," I said, "but not to dwell." I stood and walked over to the gift shop near the elevators. 10 minutes later, I returned with a wooden photo frame, oak finish, simple and elegant. I slipped the envelope inside, pressed the glass shut, and set it upright. Carol tilted her head. "Art?" "A reminder," I said. "Of what?" I looked at her. That even when they try to erase your name, the paper still remembers the first one written. Carol touched my arm before I left. "If you ever want to share a pot of tea again, you know where to find me." "I do." I hugged her again. She didn't ask me if I was okay, and I didn't pretend to be. But for the first time in a while, I felt seen. Not because someone needed something from me, but because someone remembered me. I brought the framed envelope home that night and placed it on my bookshelf, right beside the wedding album from my wedding, the one where my name hadn't been crossed out, the one where love had still meant inclusion. I asked her to meet me at Murphy's Diner, a quiet corner booth, no white linens, no waiters announcing the wine, just chipped mugs, warm coffee, and a red leather menu that's seen more truth than the ballroom ever will. Emily showed up 10 minutes late. No apology. She wore designer slacks and a silk blouse that whispered, "I deserve better than this." But she sat down. Because she knew. She'd read the news. The deed transfer had been finalized. Langston Tower, Unit PH57, was officially mine. "I assume you asked to meet so we can renegotiate," she began. Her tone was flat, controlled, like I was a client who'd overstepped, not the mother of the man she married. I stirred my coffee slowly. No, I'm not here to negotiate. She blinked, then leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. I get that you're upset about the wedding. But this isn't personal. This is real estate, investment, family planning. I looked at her for a long time, then quietly slid a folder across the table. She opened it. Her fingers trembled slightly, just slightly, as she scanned the document inside. It was a lease, not a gift, not a sale, not even a permanent arrangement, just a 12-month lease agreement with a line item that made her lips press into a thin line. Conditional occupancy clause. Tenant must complete 15 volunteer hours per week at Mayfield Women's Shelter during tenancy. She laughed once, but it wasn't amusement. This is a joke, right? No, I said calmly. You can't be serious. You want me, to mop floors and sort food donations for a bunch of women who didn't plan ahead in life? I folded my hands. They didn't plan to be beaten either, or pregnant at 17, or left with children and no health insurance. She looked away. I didn't fill the silence. I let it breathe. I didn't take anything from you, she finally muttered. This penthouse was promised to me. Your son, Christopher, told me it was part of our long-term security. And did you ever ask him? I replied, who secured it before he promised it away? She looked at me then. I could tell she didn't know. Not really. She thought the Langston project was Christopher's. He'd bragged about working with investors, choosing finishes, managing architects. But I was the anchor investor. I held the equity shares. I funded the second phase when the board pulled out. This was mine, I said. Long before your wedding hashtags and floral centerpieces. Emily's voice dropped, icy. You didn't have to do this. No, I nodded, but I did. She glanced at the lease again. You're punishing me. I'm inviting you, I said, to understand the people whose backs hold up the penthouse floor you want to live on. She laughed again, tighter this time. Do you think I'm going to parade around in an apron for Instagram? That I'll cry with broken women to earn a room in your precious tower? I think, I said, if you want to stand on the 57th floor, you should know how to stand tall on ground level. Her hands curled into fists, but her eyes wavered. I saw something crack beneath the pride. Not defeat. Recognition. Just for a second. She pushed the folder back to me. I need time, she whispered. You have 48 hours, I said. After that, someone else on the wait list. She blinked. You're renting it to the public? No, I said. To a retired school teacher with a disabled son. She works 2 jobs and still writes poetry on Sundays. Emily stared at me. You're doing this to make a point. I picked up my coffee. I already made it. You're the one deciding whether you want to learn from it. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. We didn't pretend this was healing. But as she walked out, shoulders a little lower, steps a little slower, I saw the weight of entitlement begin to slip. She didn't know yet how much that weight had been dragging her down. But she would. I sat there a while longer, paid the bill in cash, tipped generously, then opened my planner and circled a date, a quiet reminder to myself. Justice doesn't need a stage. Sometimes it's just a signature, a line drawn gently but firmly in ink. I didn't expect her to say yes, but 41 hours after that diner meeting, Ava forwarded me the signed lease, typed signature, timestamp, Emily Whitmore, tenant. Ava had also attached a brief note, penthouse keys delivered. Move-in confirmed. Shelter start date. This Friday, 9 a.m. I closed the email, took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, I exhaled with hope. Friday came. I didn't call her, didn't check if she showed up. I let the world do what it always does when entitlement meets consequence. It teaches. Rough at first, then fair. The first update didn't come from Emily. It came from Carol. Yes, Carol, the wedding receptionist, my old friend. She volunteered at Mayfield Shelter every Thursday. She texted me one photo. Emily, standing beside a crate of canned goods, looking utterly lost in a staff apron 2 sizes too big. Carol's caption was dry. She asked if the kitchen had oat milk. I didn't laugh. Well, maybe just a little. But mostly, I felt something else. Reluctant admiration. She showed up. She could have walked away. Could have stayed in a hotel and blamed me for the rest of her life. But she didn't. Carol later told me, Emily didn't speak to anyone on the first day. She hovered by the door, avoided eye contact. She wore sunglasses indoors, as if shame could be shaded like sunlight. She dropped a box of instant oatmeal, trying to lift it onto a shelf, flinched when a toddler clung to her leg, wrinkled her nose when someone asked if she could wipe down the toilet stalls. By noon, she was pale and silent. By 2 p.m., she had asked, twice, if she was allowed to leave early. But then came Arlene. Arlene was the kind of woman no one saw at the wedding. Her cardigan had holes. Her knuckles were cracked from years of dish soap and bus stops. She had 3 missing teeth and 1 photo in her wallet. A boy in a Little League uniform with Dante, 2009, scribbled in blue pen. She lost him in a custody battle, then lost herself somewhere after that. Now, she folded donated clothes and handed out toothpaste with more dignity than half the ballroom guests had ever shown me. Emily was folding socks when Arlene approached. Carol said she looked ready to recoil, but Arlene didn't judge. She just spoke. "You're new," she said. Emily nodded. "You'll probably leave," Arlene added. That made Emily look up. Arlene shrugged. "Most do. They wear clean shoes and carry pity in their pockets. Then they get bored, grossed out, or just forget we exist." Emily's face tightened. "I'm not here to pity anyone." Arlene smiled, a slow, tired, knowing smile. "I hope not. I've been waiting a long time for someone who doesn't." Later that night, Carol told me, Emily stayed an extra hour, no clock watching, no hand sanitizer after every task. She sat with a woman named Trina, who was 6 months clean and 5 days out of a breakup. She sorted canned goods with 2 kids who thought mac and cheese came in colors. She didn't ask for oat milk. She drank coffee, black, and took a second shift wiping tables. No text came from Emily, no apology, no request for acknowledgement. But on Sunday morning, a courier left something at my apartment. A bouquet of white daisies and green carnations. No note, no sender name. I knew who it was from. Emily had learned something. Not everything, but something. I sat with the bouquet in my lap and whispered to the silence around me, "She's meeting the floor. And maybe, just maybe, she'll earn her way back up." I didn't believe in punishment. Not really. What I believed in was perspective. And the only place you learn that is where the mirrors are cracked and the floor smells of bleach. Emily was starting to see. Not me. Not Christopher. But people she'd spent a lifetime stepping over. And if she kept showing up, they just might teach her how to stand without stepping on anyone ever again. It was the kind of knock that didn't belong in a penthouse hallway. Too hesitant, too soft, like the sound of someone trying not to be heard, but needing to be let in. I opened the door, and there he was, Leonard Whitmore, Emily's father, my son's new father-in-law. His suit looked slept in, not from poverty, but from pride worn too thin. His tie was askew, but his hair was perfect. Men like Leonard always made sure the part looked fine, even when everything underneath had unraveled. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began. I stepped aside and let him in. The view from the 57th floor didn't move him. His eyes went straight to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and then down. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, arms folded behind his back, as if practicing a pitch he delivered 100 times and still didn't believe. Finally, he exhaled. "I suppose congratulations are in order." I didn't respond. He turned around and gave me a half smile. "Emily told me, you're the owner now." I offered him coffee. He declined. I offered him silence. He took it for a moment. Then, "You know, Helen, there was a time I admired your husband." Harold was formidable. I nodded. "Back when I tried to start Whitmore Capital, I went to him," he said. He listened. Politely, then said he'd rather invest in cement, I remembered. "He was right," Leonard added with a short laugh. "Whitmore Capital didn't last the year." He walked to the window. "I never told Emily that. To her, I've always been the man with answers, with control, the architect of her upbringing." He turned to me. "But you're rewriting that story. And I fear she's not ready for it." I studied him, not with disdain, not even judgment, just memory. "I don't hold grudges, Leonard," I said, "but I remember every no." His jaw clenched, then relaxed. "I'm not here to ask you to undo what's been done," he said. "I came to ask for a bridge, a path forward, for Emily, for our families." "Is that why you're here?" I asked. "Because she's uncomfortable? Or because she's changing?" He hesitated. "She's trying," he finally said. I walked over to my desk, opened a drawer, took out the same note she had once returned to me with a post-it that read, "We already have everything we need." "But thank you," I laid it on the counter between us. "Need is a funny thing," I said. "You don't feel it until what you have turns out to be borrowed." Leonard picked up the note. He stared at it longer than I expected. Then he looked up at me. "No money then?" "No," I said gently, "but something else." I handed him an envelope. Inside, a copy of the lease agreement Emily had signed, with the clause highlighted. Tenant agrees to maintain active participation in the Mayfield Shelter's rehabilitation and outreach program, minimum 3 days per week, for the duration of lease term. Leonard read it. Twice. "You're making her work for the roof over her head." "I'm giving her a chance to earn the ground under her feet," I replied. He put the paper down. "She won't understand it." "Not at first. She doesn't have to," I said. "She just has to keep showing up." He looked at me. "She's not you, Helen." "No," I said. "She never had to be. But that doesn't mean she gets to dismiss who I am." Leonard stepped back. The silence in the room shifted. Warmer now, but heavier. "She was raised to believe comfort is owed." "You're trying to teach her that compassion is earned." I smiled, just slightly. "Harold said no to you. You built anyway. Now I'm saying no to her. Let's see what she builds." He stood for a long time, then nodded. Before he left, he said, "You know, if you had said yes to me back then, Emily's life would have been different." I looked at him with nothing but clarity. If Harold had said yes, she might never learn to say it to someone who truly needs it. As the door closed behind him, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. it waits. And sometimes, it knocks on your door wearing a rumpled suit, asking for mercy it once withheld. The knock on my door came earlier than expected. It wasn't the sound of apology or remorse. It was the sound of someone who still believed they were right. I opened it. Christopher stood there in his usual coat, the one I bought him in his 3rd year of med school. His eyes looked tired, not from work, but from the weight of the story he had told himself. "Can I come in?" he asked, like a stranger. I nodded. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room, pacing slightly, the way Harold used to before he'd ask for something unreasonable, but make it sound logical. "I heard from Emily's dad," Christopher began. His voice was level, but his jaw clenched. She's been cleaning floors at that shelter." "Is that what you wanted, Mom?" I didn't respond immediately. You know she's not cut out for that. "It's humiliating, is it?" I asked finally. "Or is it illuminating?" He scoffed. "Come on, you've made your point. You own the penthouse. You have the leverage. But dragging her through this, it's not like you." "No," I said quietly. "It's not like the version of me you've kept in a box labeled, 'Don't ruin the vibe.'" He blinked. "Mom, you came here to ask if I had to go this far," I said. "And I'll ask you something back. When you saw me sitting by the kitchen door, did you feel anything? Or did you look away?" His silence was deafening. I took a slow breath. "You were raised by a woman who stood in line for food stamps with you on her hip, who worked night shifts, skipped dinners, mended your father's debts. And somehow, along the way, you decided that woman could be sidelined at her own son's wedding." He didn't deny it. He didn't defend it. But his voice, when it returned, was sharper than I expected. "Do you even care what this is doing to us?" And there it was, the fear, not of justice, but of discomfort, not of my pain, but of the inconvenience of acknowledging it. "You're afraid of how this looks," I said, "but I'm afraid of what I've become. A mother who swallowed enough insults in silence to make her son forget she has a voice." I stood, matching his height. "You're worried I've gone too far." "I'm worried I didn't draw the line soon enough." He looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but I saw it. The flicker of doubt, the flash of understanding. He wasn't just defending Emily. He was defending the fragile system that kept him from facing the mirror. "You think I'm punishing her," I said softly. "But I'm not. I'm reminding her. Reminding both of you that love without respect isn't love. It's entitlement." He finally sat down. And then, for the first time, he didn't talk over me. He just listened. "I don't hate her," I said, "but I can't reward her cruelty with comfort." She wanted the view from the 57th floor, without seeing the woman who built the elevator shaft. Christopher dropped his gaze. "You raised me better than this," he said. I nodded. "That's why I'm doing this." "So you remember?" He stood again, slower this time. "I'll talk to her." "Don't," I replied. "Just watch her. And decide if that's the woman you want beside you when you're 70. He reached the door, paused, then turned back. "You're not mad at me, are you?" I smiled. Not out of joy, but from a place of resignation. "No, Chris. I'm just finally mad for me." I didn't go back to the shelter. I let silence be the mirror. And sometimes silence says more than any scolding ever could. But Carol passed along something, a whisper really, that Emily had started showing up early. No makeup, no silk scarf, no excuses. They said she barely spoke at first. She just watched Arlene refill the coffee urn, watched old men trace photographs with trembling fingers, watched women tremble while folding blankets for strangers. It was Carol who told me what happened one Tuesday afternoon. Emily was scrubbing the corner tiles of the women's bathroom. The grout was caked with things she'd never had to name. Her nails were cracked, her fingers raw, but she didn't stop. Arlene walked in. Arlene, who'd lost her son to a system that couldn't hold his sorrow. Arlene, who always remembered names, even when people forgot hers. "You missed a spot," Arlene said with a smile, pointing with her cane. Emily looked up, flushed with frustration. "I know. I'm trying. I didn't mean the tile, sweetheart," Arlene said gently. "I meant your heart." Emily sat back, exhausted. "It doesn't matter. No one sees me here anyway." "That's funny," Arlene replied, "because I've been seeing you all week." Silence fell between them. Then Emily, maybe out of pure fatigue, or maybe something deeper, whispered, "I used to think people like you ended up here because they made mistakes, but now I think I'm the one who made them." Arlene lowered herself onto a chair. Her knees cracked, but her voice didn't. "We all make mistakes. That's not the point. The point is who you become when no one's watching." Emily looked at her. "I was watching my whole life. Watching my mom clean houses. Watching her skip dinner so I could eat. Watching her work 2 shifts and still get called lazy. I was watching. I just never said thank you." Arlene tilted her head. "Where is she now?" Emily hesitated. "She collapsed at work. Heart failure. They said it was silent." She bit her lip. "I was in college. I had just texted her that she was overbearing, that she needed to stop calling so much, that I wasn't a kid anymore." The tears came slowly. She didn't wipe them away. "I called her a burden. I called my own mother a burden." Arlene didn't reach out. She didn't hug her. She just looked at her, steady. "Sounds to me," Arlene said softly, "like you've been trying to erase that label ever since." Emily nodded. Arlene took a deep breath. "You know," she said, "I used to work in a print shop. Back when people still ordered business cards, folks would come in with typos, or the wrong job title, or a name they didn't want anymore." She smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how easy it is to run a new print, but you'd be shocked how few people bother to ask for one." Emily looked puzzled. Arlene pointed to the shelter's front desk, where the volunteers' name tags were stacked, laminated, taped. "You don't have to keep wearing the first name they gave you," she said. Emily stood slowly, walked to the desk, picked up one of the blank tags. For a long while, she just held the marker. She didn't write volunteer. She didn't write Mrs. Langston. She didn't even write Emily. She wrote something in small, careful letters, something only she could read at first. Then she tucked the card into her pocket. Arlene smiled. "Looks like you found your new label." Carol told me all of this the next day. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. But I did sit by the window longer than usual that morning, just letting the sun pour in like something sacred. Because somewhere across the city, a woman who had once erased my name from a wedding invitation had just written her own name back into something real. Not on a deed, not on a gift tag, but on her own soul. And she hadn't shown it to anyone yet, but I knew. One day she would. The envelope came in the mail that morning. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Carol's, with her rounded cursive and the occasional loop too large for the line. Inside were 2 things. The first, a black and white photograph. I gasped before I even registered it fully. It was from a spring gala in '85. Harold and I were standing under a wisteria arch, champagne in hand, both laughing at something out of frame. I hadn't seen that photo in decades. And yet, there we were. I looked so young. He looked like he still believed the world could be shaped into something soft. I traced his lapel with my thumb, the velvet trim, the slight smudge of lipstick I never noticed until now. The second item made my breath catch. It was a copy of Christopher and Emily's wedding invitation. Only my name had been crossed out. A thick line of black marker slashed through Vesper Helen Whitmore. Carol had found it in the hotel trash bin, apparently. She had taped it back together and made a photocopy. "In case you ever needed to remember who you are," she'd written in a sticky note, yellow and creased. I placed the photo and the invitation side by side. Then, slowly, I walked to the living room, pulled down an old album I hadn't opened in years. It creaked when I laid it on the table. Inside were pages of fading snapshots. Christopher's first tooth, Harold holding him up in the garden, me in my maternity dress laughing under a crooked clothesline. Life in sepia tones. I flipped to the back of the album and slipped the wedding invite inside a clear sleeve, just behind our family Christmas photo from 1992. Then I added the photograph of Harold and me, sliding it carefully next to it. For a long while, I just sat there, fingers hovering. Then I reached for a note card. Just a plain white card with gold trim, no logo, no heading. And I wrote, "To the one who once called me a burden, I used to think I had to earn my space in every room. That being invited meant being grateful, no matter the terms. That quiet suffering was a kind of grace." I stayed silent through years of dismissals, of being talked over, of being too much, or not enough. I wore those labels like moth-eaten coats and still tried to smile in family photos. When you crossed my name off that invitation, you didn't just erase a guest. You tried to erase a history. But let me remind you, I was there when he had night terrors. I was there for every parent-teacher conference, every science fair, every scraped knee. I was there when no one else was. I gave more than I had. And still, I was labeled afterthought. You see, the insult wasn't in the seating chart. It was in the intent. You didn't just forget me. You chose to. But I chose something else. I chose to walk out of that room with my head held high. I chose not to shout, not to beg, not to crumble. I chose dignity. I chose to correct the ledger, not with cruelty, but with clarity. Because if you're going to print a label for me, at least let the records show the truth. I was never the burden. I carried the burden. And I carried it well. Still, I don't hate you. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, certainly. But hate? Number. Hate is heavy. And I've carried enough. So I'll set that down now. And I'll keep this picture. I'll keep this album. I'll keep my name. And one day, if the silence breaks and you find your way back to memory, you might look for this letter. You might want to know what I felt. So here it is. I felt erased, but I stayed visible. I felt discarded, but I stayed whole. I felt forgotten, but I remembered myself. And I still chose dignity, even if it cost me everything else. Vesper Helen. I folded the letter, didn't sign it, didn't seal it. I tucked it into the back of the album, behind the pictures, behind the tears, behind the years. Some letters don't need to be sent to be true. They just need to be written. I wasn't expecting a knock that morning, the kind that isn't hurried or hesitant, just present, like a quiet offering. I'd just finished watering the jade plant near the balcony, watching the soil darken and breathe. The city was unusually still, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for anything. The knock came again, 3 gentle taps. I opened the door. Emily stood there, not dressed up, not with perfectly styled hair or designer sunglasses like usual. No makeup, no script, just Emily, raw around the eyes, sleeves pushed to her elbows, fingernails bare. She didn't say a word. No apology. No preamble. No, I was wrong, or can we talk? Instead, she held something out, a name tag, like the one I'd received at the wedding. Only this one was different. It was handwritten, not printed, on thick paper with soft gold trim. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. It read, Helen Worthing, Mother. Just that. No qualifiers, no caveats, no labels like afterthought or guest. No sign she was trying to impress anyone. Just the truth. I stared at it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in the air between us. Then I reached out and took it from her hand. It was slightly warm, maybe from her palm, maybe from the walk-up. I didn't speak. Neither did she. But something shifted. Something unspoken passed through the air like a sigh that had been held for too many months. We stood in that stillness. And for once, silence wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a weapon. It was a language. She gave a slight nod. I returned it. No ceremony, no dramatics, just 2 women acknowledging a fracture and the slow, tentative stitching of its edge. Emily turned, quietly walking down the hallway. Her steps didn't echo. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. I closed the door behind her. My fingers tightened slightly around the tag. The handwriting curved just a little too far on the W in Worthing, as if she had hesitated, as if even writing it had required courage. I walked back toward the window. The sun was beginning to settle into that soft, golden place, where it makes everything look like it's been dipped in forgiveness. Outside, the city shimmered. A breeze curled up over the railing. It brushed against my arm, gentle as breath. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like an accessory to someone else's joy. I felt here, not as a footnote, not as a burden, but simply mother. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase the ache or rewrite what had been said, but it was something. And sometimes something honest is enough to begin again. The balcony door was open. I stepped out barefoot, letting the wood warm my soles. Below me, the streets moved as usual. People late to meetings, buses heaving, dogs tugging leashes. Above me, the sky was a clear, impossible blue. No planes, no smog, just openness. I held the name tag in both hands. Let the breeze ripple through it. It didn't flutter away. It stayed. Like me, it had snowed the night before. The kind of snow that covers broken sidewalks and rusty fences with a quiet mercy, softening the edges, giving everything a second chance to look new again. I arrived at the shelter early, holding a box of scarves I'd knitted myself. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Inside, the dining hall had been cleared. Folding tables lined the walls, each piled high with coats, gloves, boots in every size. Some new, some gently used, all lovingly sorted. Children darted around, trying on puffy jackets that swallowed them whole. Laughter echoed off the concrete walls, and in the center of it all stood Emily. She wore a simple navy coat and a Santa hat that drooped slightly to one side. She was kneeling beside a little girl, maybe 6 years old, helping her zip up a bright red parka. "There," Emily said, tugging the zipper to the top and brushing hair from the girl's face. "Now you're ready for the North Pole." The girl beamed. "I'm Maria. Do you remember me?" Emily smiled. "Of course I do, Maria. You were here last week, green mittens, right?" Maria giggled and nodded. Emily stood up slowly, her knees stiff from the floor, and looked around the room. There was no spotlight, no camera crew, no grand applause. Just people. Warmed. Seen. I watched from the doorway, unseen. Loretta, the shelter's longtime manager, stepped up beside Emily and touched her elbow. "You've done something good today," she said. Emily let out a breath. "I just handed out jackets." Loretta shook her head. "No, honey. You showed up. You listened. You remembered names. That's what makes people feel human again." There was a pause. Loretta asked, gently, "You came here because of a condition in a contract. But why did you stay?" Emily looked across the room. Maria was spinning in her new coat, arms out wide, laughing without reserve. Emily's voice was quiet but clear. "Because she remembered my name." Loretta smiled and gave her shoulder a soft squeeze. That moment held still in time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tearful. But it was healing. I stepped back into the hallway before they saw me. This was hers. This was not mine to interrupt or define. I sat in the hallway for a while, letting the muffled sounds of joy roll toward me through the cinder block walls. The kind of sounds that don't need words, just presence. Eventually, Emily stepped out, not surprised to see me waiting there. She didn't look startled or guilty, just settled. She held a paper cup of cocoa. "Extra marshmallows," she said, handing it to me. I remembered. I took it with a soft smile. "You did." We walked outside together. Snow was falling again, light as ash, settling on our shoulders without a sound. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded list. "These are the kids who still don't have boots," she said. "Sizes and names." She didn't ask me for money. She asked me to help. And that mattered. We stood on the sidewalk for a long time. No long speech, no closure neatly tied. But the air between us was different now. She was learning, not by being punished, but by being present. And I was learning too. That healing doesn't come from being called mother on a name tag. It comes from watching someone change because they chose to, because they listened, because they stayed. I looked at Emily, her cheeks pink from the cold, her breath visible in the morning air. "You ready to go find some boots?" I asked. She nodded. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed her. I made roast chicken, not because it was a holiday, not because anyone was visiting, just because I had the time. And the quiet. The rosemary from my little garden patch was still fragrant, despite the chill in the air. I added it to the pan, drizzled olive oil, basted everything slowly. The kind of cooking you only do when no one's rushing you. The kind of meal that lets the house smell like warmth again. I just finished setting the table, 2 plates, 2 cloth napkins, water with lemon slices, when I heard a knock. I didn't expect anyone. Not really. I opened the door, and there he was. Christopher. No text, no warning, no Emily, just him. He held a bottle of apple cider. Thought this might go better with chicken than the usual wine. I didn't say anything. Just stepped aside and let him in. He looked around the house like it was the first time he'd really seen it. His eyes paused on the mantel, where an old photograph of Harold and me stood next to a new one of me holding Lily last Christmas. "You changed the curtains," he said. I nodded. I change things sometimes. We sat. We didn't turn on the television. We didn't check our phones. We just ate. And the silence wasn't sharp. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was patient. He took a bite, chewed slowly, then said, "This tastes like Sundays when I was 10. I smiled softly. It is. He didn't say much for a while. Then, over the last spoonfuls of mashed potatoes, he set down his fork. His voice was quiet, careful. Do you hate me, Mom? I folded my napkin, looked at him, not through him. No, I said. He nodded, as if trying to believe it, because sometimes I think I deserve it. I reached for my water, took a sip, then answered. I don't hate you, Christopher. I never could, but I was angry, not just at you. At myself, he looked confused. At yourself? For being silent for so long, I said. For shrinking myself to fit into everyone's plans. For thinking if I just stayed quiet, if I smiled enough, everything would hold together. He dropped his eyes. I continued, my voice steady. I let people call me things. Afterthought. Burden. Not with words, but with how they treated me. And I let it happen. Over and over, he opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand gently. This isn't blame, Chris. This is clarity. You were raised by a woman who thought self-sacrifice was love, who never taught you to question that he swallowed hard. I should have protected you. No, I said softly. You should have seen me. That's all. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed, not from anger, but recognition. I see you now, he whispered. I nodded. Then we begin here. He looked around, blinking. It's quieter than I remember. I smiled. That's because the noise is gone. We cleared the dishes together, like we used to, years ago. No rush. When he left, he paused at the door. I'm proud of you, he said. I touched his arm. I'm still proud of you too. Even when I was hurt, he stepped out into the cold evening. I closed the door slowly behind him. The house held a different stillness now. Not lonely, but lived in. Not waiting. Just being. I sat down at the table again, poured myself a second glass of cider, and lit the candle in the center. It flickered gently. Sometimes, the most powerful redemption doesn't arrive with a bang or a speech. Sometimes, it looks like a grown man coming home for dinner. Sometimes, it sounds like two people eating in silence, because words are no longer needed to prove they care. And sometimes, it's enough. I waited until the house was quiet. Again, no knocks, no calls, just me, my cup of peppermint tea, and the envelope that had been waiting on the desk for far too long. Unopened, not out of fear, but timing. The old trust papers were brittle, tired from decades of assumptions. I laid them out in front of me like a map I once followed blindly, and beside them I placed a blank page. Clean, wide, ready. I didn't call Ava, not yet. This part, I needed to draft by hand. The first name I wrote wasn't family. It was Safe Haven Shelter. I remembered the look in Emily's eyes that day, when she handed out the coats to children who never asked for pity, only warmth. I remembered the way she knelt to tie a little boy's shoes and didn't flinch when his hands were sticky, when his voice was loud. They had undone something in her, those children. And for that, the shelter deserved more than a check. It deserved a future. I wrote, 10% of the trust will go to Safe Haven Shelter annually, in perpetuity. Then I added a name beneath that clause, one that hadn't appeared in any version before. Arlene. No last name, just Arlene, the woman who sat in silence beside Emily during her first breakdown. The woman who had lost more than I could ever imagine, but still showed up, still stayed late, still remembered other people's birthdays. A personal bequest of $250,000 to Arlene, to be used at her full discretion, No conditions, no questions. I paused. Let the weight of that line sink in. Too many people go through life without anyone trusting them with anything. She had trusted Emily with her story. Now it was time someone trusted her back. Next came Christopher. This part was harder. I thought of how he'd shown up without warning, how he didn't make excuses, didn't demand forgiveness, how he'd simply sat, eaten, remembered who I was. I didn't want to reward performance. I wanted to affirm growth. So I wrote, Christopher Worthing shall inherit 20% of the estate, contingent upon his voluntary service of 200 hours at any registered community organization over the next 24 months. Proof of completion to be submitted via affidavit, not a punishment. A reminder. Love without contribution isn't legacy. It's expectation. Finally, I came to the penthouse. I looked out my own window. The view from here wasn't as high, not as dramatic, but it was mine. And for the first time, I saw clearly what that meant. Emily's name came last. I wrote, the Langston Penthouse, 57th floor, is to be gifted in full to Emily Worthing under the following conditions. I took a breath. That she continue her service at Safe Haven Shelter for a minimum of 2 days per week for no less than 3 years. That she submit annual reports detailing community projects she has initiated or supported. That if either condition is not met for more than 2 consecutive quarters, ownership reverts to the Helen Worthing Foundation. I leaned back. I wasn't writing this out of spite or control. I was writing it out of truth, because power means nothing if you hoard it. But stewardship, that's what builds something lasting. I signed at the bottom with a slow, deliberate hand. Helen Worthing. The same name once scribbled on the edge of a wedding invitation, and then crossed out. I sealed the document and whispered to no one in particular, real power isn't in what you own. It's in how you leave it behind. The wind moved gently through the open window. Somewhere in the city, I imagined Emily walking out of the shelter, wiping sweat from her brow, waving goodbye to Maria. Somewhere else, Arlene might be sipping coffee from her new porch. And maybe, just maybe, Christopher was helping someone move boxes in a church basement, not for a check, not for a clause, just to feel useful again. I didn't need to witness it all. Legacy doesn't ask for applause. It only asks that you show up while you're here and leave quietly when the time is right. It was a Tuesday, not the kind you circle on calendars. No big milestones, no photographers, just a handwritten flyer taped to the shelter's side gate. Warm winter gathering, all welcome. Emily had written the words herself. I recognized her loops and soft angles, even from a distance. The letters had the warmth of someone who finally knew what it meant to open her arms. Inside, the folding chairs weren't matching. The tablecloths were creased, and the centerpieces were simple glass jars filled with wildflowers and crayons for the kids. It was perfect. Everyone wore a name tag. Not the cheap ones from printers. These were crafted from thick cardstock, cut with pinking shears. Calligraphy in black ink. Full names, no abbreviations, no rolls missing. No one was just +1. No one was guessed. As I stepped through the door, Loretta waved me in. "There she is," she said, like I'd been expected. Emily crossed the room. Her sweater had paint on the cuff. Her hair wasn't styled, just pulled back with a pencil. And she looked more radiant than she did on her wedding day. She didn't make a speech. She didn't apologize with tears. She simply took my hand and whispered, "You sit at the head of the table, Mom." It wasn't a performance. It was a placement. I walked toward the seat she pointed to, covered in a soft yellow cushion, and I smiled as I lowered myself onto it. The light from the window brushed across the table, and for a second, the air felt golden. From my purse, I took out the old name tag, the one with sharp block letters. No curve, no warmth, just one word, afterthought. I laid it gently on the table in front of me. Not bitter, not wounded, just honest. Then, beside it, I placed the new one. Helen, Mother. The two cards sat side by side. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. Across the room, Christopher laughed with Loretta over a crooked tray of cookies. Arlene adjusted Maria's scarf and helped her fold a paper swan. Ava dropped off a stack of donated gloves and gave me a wink. This wasn't the ending I'd planned. But maybe that's the miracle. Sometimes you have to be mistaken for the last to matter, to become the one they remember most. We stayed long after the food was gone. Emily poured cider into chipped mugs. The heater clicked on and off. The children kept coloring. And I looked around, at a room that had once been filled with strangers, and saw a family, not by blood, but by choice. Before the lights dimmed, I stood to leave. Emily walked me to the door, her hand warm in mine. "Thank you," she said. Just 2 words. But this time, they weren't transactional. They were tender. I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. She opened the door, and the cold air greeted us with a hush. A soft snow had begun to fall. Quiet flakes, slow and unbothered. I stepped outside, clutching both name tags in one hand, and just before the screen door shut behind me, I heard Loretta's voice say to the room, she was never just a guest. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this. A community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.